Hello everyone, this is David from Automotive Press. I have two really interesting electric cars right here. I have the Hyundai IONIQ 5, which is all new, and then I have the Kia Niro EV, which is interesting because of course the Niro comes in a number of different variations, not just fully electric car. So these two cars are not exact competitors. They both of course belong to the Hyundai group, but it's really interesting to compare the two because they're in a similar price range and they also kind of drive very similar. So let me walk you through, first of all, and do the engineer's audit and quality check and show you what the differences might be between these two cars. And I'm going to point out 3 things I like better about the IONIQ 5 and 3 things I like better about the Kia, and then you can figure out for yourself which might be the right car for you. So let me get right into it. So I'm going to be doing my engineer's audit, which includes a couple of interesting things that maybe other social media people might not do. So first of all, to test these two cars properly, you gotta check out that everything meets the specification. So I've already measured the tire pressure on both cars and adjusted to the manufacturer's suggested pressure. You'll be surprised how much difference just the 1 or 2 PSI might make in terms of driving feel. And I'm going to check for paint quality, which includes using this gauge, which measures the thickness of the paint. And then finally, I'm going to use a caliper to measure the panel alignment and the gap. Now, this is not quite the exact one we normally use in the auto industry, but this is the easiest one to use for now. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the driving feel. So those are some of the things I'm going to do. So stay with me as I go through and check the quality of each of these cars. So first I'm going to check the paint thickness of the IONIQ 5. Now in terms of the overall paint quality, it's excellent through and through from beginning to end. I noticed no pigmentation issues or orange peel. In fact, I would say the paint fit and finish and the quality of this IONIQ 5 is as good as what you will find in a very expensive 6-figures car. But what about the thickness? Well, this is aluminum here, so I'm going to check the steel panels. Check here. It's 114 micron, and in the doors, 141, a little bit thicker, which is very common, 131. So usually you want the paint thickness to be between 100 to 120 as a minimum, and the European cars tend to have a thicker paint, as much as 130 to 150 micron. So 115, a little bit thinner as you go higher up in the roof here. So this is more or less the standard thickness. It's about averaging about 120, 125. Let's take a look now on the Kia. Okay, so it's 128 here, 115, 130, and 119. So very similar again. About 120, 125 as an average. You can use the thickness gauge to figure out whether the car ever had an accident. If it had an accident and they repainted over, the paint thickness will be much, much thicker, like 200 micron. And you can usually tell if it had gone through some body damage. But in terms of the general finish of the paint, I think the IONIQ 5 is a little bit better than Kia. Not a huge difference, maybe 5% better, because I did notice a little bit more orange peel on this side and not quite as smooth. But they're pretty close and surprisingly good. And in fact, I was looking at the body gaps as well. I'm going to use a caliper right now to measure it and let you know if the body panels are aligned together really well and whether or not it's better than the Japanese. Let's take a look. The reason why this is so important is that how the body panels come together is a reflection of the quality for the whole car. We always say as an automotive engineer, if they can put the body panels together really well, everything else falls in place. So in terms of the IONIQ 5 versus the Kia Niro, let's take a look at the body gaps. And so what I'm doing is I use a ping pong ball to kind of go back and forth between the gaps to see, first of all, if they're aligned together really well, and secondly, whether or not the gaps are consistent and what the actual gap might be. I've also gone around and checked all of the body gaps on both cars. And what I can say is that it's surprisingly, the Kia is slightly better in terms of the overall panel alignment. What I mean by that is that on the Kia, if you put your ping pong ball across and try to figure out the alignment of the two panels, both in terms of the front section and also the side panels, it's surprisingly good. almost as good as the Lexus model, if you could believe that. In fact, if you go to the rear of this SUV and look at the panel alignment for the hatch, shockingly good. And of course, in this Hyundai, it's also very good, and the gaps are ranging from about 4 to 4.5 millimeter in terms of the actual gap between the panels. And that's actually a little bit better than the standard I come across. Usually the gaps are 5 to 7 millimeters, sometimes as much as 7 or 8 millimeters, which will be way too wide. But on the Hyundai, it's consistently 4 to 4.5 or 5 millimeters, so it's excellent. And so if you ever doubt whether Korean can build a really good cars, well, here's the proof. Both of them has shockingly good body panel alignment. In fact, on the Kia Niro, the range of the gap is sort of a 3.5 to about 4.5 millimeter, depending on where you measure. And once again, that is world class. Even Lexus is in that neighborhood. So those are my quick conclusion in terms of the overall quality. The paint job is excellent. I would give it A- on this one, maybe B+ on this one. And the body alignment, I give this one maybe A-, and on this one, a solid A, because it's just really well aligned together. Now let's take a look inside and see what the fit and finish might be. Alright, so I'm now inside the Hyundai IONIQ 5, and this is probably the most cool thing about this car, because honestly it looks like something out of the future. In fact, I keep joking that if Apple was truly going to design an electric car, this is probably how it's going to look inside and out, and it's definitely the coolest electric car you can buy now. But in terms of the interior, let me just do a quick quality check. So I just simply use my fist and do check to see everything fits and nothing rattles or squeaks. I've done this already a couple of times, and so far everything fits really well. None of the panels are out of alignment, and there's no rattles at all when I'm driving. So absolutely first class in terms of the interior fit and finish. And what's really cool about this car is not just the design elements, but the fact that you get some of the latest infotainment system and the latest gadgets. Everything from augmented reality, head-up display, to a dual 12.3 inches panel, to even the drive selector is kind of unique in the stock-oriented style, which is a little bit odd, and it requires some getting used to. Again, it goes along with this futuristic looking design. This entire center console moves forward and backward, and there's an ottoman style mechanism that you can lift this up, and if you're just waiting for someone, maybe at the airport, you can lie down almost flat and just take it easy and take a break. So all these cool features are on this particular car. But the three most important things I like about this IONIQ 5 compared to Kia is, first, obviously, as I mentioned, it's got a cool design. It looks futuristic, which means that it's going to look good for many years to come. And so it should retain good resale value. So that's the first thing, is that it has a lot of technology built in, more up-to-date infotainment system, and generally speaking, more up-to-date features than the Kia Niro EV. And secondly, it is a bigger car with more room. In fact, there's so much room in this car, you'll think that this is a full-size SUV. And this is one advantage of an electric car, because there's no drive shaft underneath, and so there's a lot of space because of the really long wheelbase, and so lots of room for the front and the back. Seats are very comfortable, and so I think it's a little bit more practical also than the Kia. Granted, Kia is obviously a little bit cheaper, but the price difference isn't as big as you would think. And finally, the third advantage of the IONIQ 5 compared to the Kia is that this one comes in two configurations: rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, which is important for winter driving here in Canada, whereas the Kia Niro EV only comes in front-wheel drive. So that's one advantage for this one. What about something that I'm not too crazy about? Well, overall, what I would say that there's still frustration when they convert everything to the infotainment system, and so all the control more or less is in here. Thankfully, we do have some buttons here for volume control, but even just changing the temperature requires you to touch this up and down, and it's fine if you can look at it, but the problem is if you're driving and you're trying to figure this out, well, all of this is a touch panel, so it makes it a little bit more awkward. Even trying to turn on the seat warmer and so forth requires you to get into the menus. So this is the trend, and all electric cars are moving that way, but this is where the Kia is advantageous because of the buttons that they have. But overall, obviously, the IONIQ 5 is a more interesting car to own and drive, which is a bit of an unfair comparison because this really competes with Kia's up-and-coming EV6 electric car. That's the one it should be compared to this one. But let's hop into the Kia now, and let's take a look and see what kind of advantage there is on the Niro side compared to the IONIQ 5. So now I am in the Kia Niro EV. One of the first things I should point out is that Niro is available in different configurations, including the normal gasoline engine Niro, as well as a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, and this EV. So you get a lot more choice. So that gives you a better price range as well. The Niro is cheaper than IONIQ 5, so that's one big advantage. If you don't have to have a full electric version and you don't mind buying the plug-in hybrid, it's even cheaper still. But you do only have front-wheel drive, and there's no all-wheel drive available, at least with this EV version. But keep in mind that the Niro EV only comes in front-wheel drive because electric motor drives the front wheels. But in terms of the advantage of this one compared to IONIQ 5, well, surprisingly, it drives a little bit better. It's a bit sportier. The steering has a better feedback from the road. It's a bit stiffer in terms of overall feel. And so it kind of feels like a sports SUV versus the IONIQ 5, which is clearly designed to be a very much a comfort-oriented one. But if you like driving something that's kind of fun to drive, surprisingly, the Niro is better than most other electric cars I've driven. Quick steering and tracks really well. The second advantage is the fact that this is still a conventional design in terms of the interior. So you still get all the buttons for radios, the temperature is easy to adjust, the rear defroster, the front defroster, everything is a conventional style, and even the transmission shifter, this is sort of like a Range Rover or Jaguar style of the dial for the shifter. So this is easy to use, and so there's lots of buttons, and personally I still think nothing can beat having physical buttons. So I really like about that. And you still get the up-to-date infotainment system, which is shared across the Hyundai group, and you still get the electric instrument cluster here as well. So everything is modernized, but with the advantage of having physical buttons and controls, which I think cannot be beaten. And overall, because the Niro is cheaper than IONIQ 5, there's a cost advantage, or there's a little bit more value associated with buying this one. In terms of the quality, again, I did a little bit of a rattle check earlier. All the plastic components look solid. None of the gaps seems to be out of alignment, and both the exterior and interior of this Kia Niro is really well built. Again, I was surprised at how well it's built. So no problem with interior fit and finish. So now it's time to take both of these cars out for a short drive and tell you what the differences are. As I mentioned, I think this one does drive a little bit sportier, but let's talk about it on the road a little bit more. Okay, so we're now taking the Hyundai IONIQ 5 for a drive. As I mentioned multiple times, this is a super cool car inside and out. And when you drive it, you might be shocked at how smooth and refined and quiet it is. Kind of like a Lexus almost in many ways. But this one has a very refined, super smooth feel that has a kind of a luxury car feel. You could almost put a Genesis badge on this and it would fit right in. Aside from the very silky smooth ride, it has plenty of power and of course substantial torque because of electric motors. So you step on the gas and this thing takes off 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds, which is hard to believe because that's kind of sports car territory. The steering isn't quite as tight and as sporty as the Kia Niro EV because this is probably geared toward more of a luxury car market, but very predictable steering and a good balance of the feedback from the road and a good on-center feel. In fact, when you make quick turns on this car, it has a very agile feel to it. In fact, this car is very quick to respond regardless of the type of driving you do. And so it provides a level of confidence sometimes that is missing in other EVs or plug-in hybrids. For example, my wife has a Toyota RAV4 hybrid, which functions as a purely electric car. And it's not as smooth, not as fun to drive, and not as predictable as this IONIQ 5. So first class overall driving feel, extremely well balanced, and not quite as fun to drive perhaps as a sportier Niro. So obviously this isn't sports car by any means, but it has sufficient agility and a really good road feel that provides, generally speaking, pretty good level of fun to drive factors. So you're not going to get bored driving this car, but your passengers will love it because it has so much space front and back, and it is just so ultra smooth regardless of the road condition that you might be driving in. So there's lots of quirky things that might find it a little bit unusual, but you get used to it. Everything from the way you select your driving mode to the way you navigate the infotainment system requires a bit of a learning curve. But once you learn it, you're going to appreciate all the cool factors that you find in this car, and all the lighting inside at night is quite amazing. So really appreciate Hyundai's effort with this. If I were to buy an electric car that is kind of like a crossover slash SUV, this is probably on top of my list because it's definitely one of the most interesting and fascinating cars to arrive our shores from Hyundai. So I am now in the Kia Niro EV, and the driving feel is definitely the strength of this car. It's surprisingly agile, very solid on the road, and the ride is not harsh. And so if you're ever wondering, because of the humble design outside, you might ask, does this thing actually drive okay? Well, it's more than just okay. It's sporty, it's firm, and it drives better than most of other electric cars I've driven, including the newer electric cars from Tesla. If you can put this in simple terms, it's like a sports sedan because it provides pretty good road feel. The steering is not super light. You can put it on the different mode here, by the way. So I can put it in the sport mode, and it doesn't make a huge difference, but it is definitely a bit sportier in terms of the transmission shifting and the steering feel. Overall, I kind of really like driving this thing. It's about the right balance of firmness and also comfort. And because it's an electric car, it's also very quiet. The acceleration is brisk. Unfortunately, it is front-wheel drive only, so if you step on the gas too much, and because electric motors have maximum torque right from the beginning, you can spin the front wheels really easily. So that's about the only downside. They should really offer the all-wheel drive version. But the new EV6 is coming out, so that's obviously the one to get probably. But if you're buying something right now, I would say there's nothing wrong with buying this Kia Niro EV for good value, good price, and just overall very agile and flexible feel in terms of the on-the-road driving. So I give it a high marks for that, maybe as much as B or B plus for driving feel. And overall, I think it's actually better value than most people realize, just because a lot of people are looking at other electric cars, not necessarily this one. Please go ahead and take a drive on it, and you might just fall in love with this one. So that's just a summary for the Kia Niro. I hope you learned a lot from this two comparison of the two electric cars. A lot more to come your way from my channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'm signing off for now.